Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a wonderful Easter with your friends and family. We sure did. And I hope you enjoyed my last video on the Easter bunny cake. Tonight I am going to talk about a topic that sometimes is a little taboo. And it wasn't really something I had planned on talking about, but it is something that I feel in my heart that I should talk about, because I feel like it's something that many people are inflicted with. I personally have been dealing with this since I was a teenager, so many years, and that is depression. And tonight I'm just going to give a few statistics about how prevalent depression is in the United States, and also about some of the signs of depression, because sometimes when we think about depression, we think of it being, in a dark mood or whatever. Well, it can manifest itself in different ways. So I'm briefly going to talk about that, may touch on some therapies for that. But I'm mostly here to share my experiences over the years with depression, things that have worked, things that have not worked, and I also want to be very transparent with you guys and just let you know how I'm actually doing right now. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I want to start by talking about how prevalent depression is. And I have some notes here in front of me, so you'll see me looking down occasionally. So, as of 2023, there are 21 million adult Americans who have experienced at least one major episode of depression. Think about that, 21 million people. And the amazing thing, there are so many people that are affected by depression. However, it is such a taboo. Mental health in general is something that we a lot of times don't acknowledge. We don't consider mental health as much of a problem as physical health. Well, let me say, I'm the first to tell you, if you have a problem with depression, there is absolutely nothing wrong with seeking treatment for your depression. It can affect every aspect of your life. Not only does it affect you mentally, it also affects you physically. Research has shown, and this came from the Johns Hopkins, an article that I got from Johns Hopkins, that people who are depressed are more likely to have cardiovascular disease, they're more likely to have back pain, arthritis, diabetes, hypertension. So chronic physical illnesses as well. Seems to go more hand in hand with folks who are depressed. And it's also deadly. And what I mean by that, 1 out of 5 people with major depression will attempt self-harm. 1 out of 5. That's terrifying. Here's the thing, guys. Depression is not just a sad mood that you can snap out of. You can't do it. I'll never forget, I had a family member several years ago. I was talking about my depression, and this family member said to me, well, you just have to deal with it. We all have problems. You just have to deal with it. That's probably the absolute worst thing you can say to someone who is in a major depressive episode. Because here's the deal. There are MRI studies that show there are actual physical changes in the brain of a person who has major depression. Neurotransmitters, there's different levels, low levels of neurotransmitters in the brain of people who have depression. There is a physical reason. It is just not, oh, they're a victim, they're a weak person, which is so many times what we hear. which is one reason I think it's such a stigma to talk about mental health, because it is perceived by those who have not experienced it as, oh, they're just weak. They're not strong enough. They're not a strong person. And it really makes the person who is battling the depression feel inferior. It's the best way I know to describe it. You feel inferior. You feel like something is wrong with you. But it's no different than, for example, you had diabetes. You're not going to feel inferior because your pancreas doesn't produce insulin like it should, or maybe it doesn't produce insulin at all. It's okay. But if that same person were taking antidepressants for depression, oh, that would be a big deal. So it really upsets me when I hear people talk about, well, so-and-so's on antidepressants or so-and-so's on anti-anxiety medications. Mental health can affect your life even more so at times than physical health. So this is a message that we need to get out to people. We need to let folks know it is okay to seek help. It is okay to seek treatment. It is okay to talk about. You're not inferior. You just have an imbalance of the chemicals in your brain that need to be adjusted. Simple as that. So, another statistic for you. And these are risks for depression. Women are 2 times more likely to be diagnosed. And I have a theory on why that is. I think that women are more likely to go to a provider to get treatment. I think men in our society, it is definitely a sign of weakness for a man to seek help for any kind of mental health problem, especially depression, because men are taught you've got to be strong, you've got to deal with things. So I think it's just horrible that men do not feel like that they can seek treatment. Also, other risk for depression, if you've experienced a stressful event. So there's positive stress. Here's the thing that I find fascinating. The body does not distinguish between good stress and bad stress. Your body reacts to stress in exactly the same way. A good stress, you will get the same response as you get from a bad stress, if the good stress is significant enough. So your body doesn't say, oh, that's a good stress, so I'll deal with that. So good stress can bring on depressive episodes. Another fact. Sometimes your childhood could play into that. Now, I want to be careful here in that I don't want people to think that if you're depressed, that means something horrible happened to you in your childhood. That's not what that means at all. But a lot of people who are depressed did have a traumatic childhood. So doesn't mean everybody who's depressed had a bad childhood. I had a tremendous childhood, but I've dealt with depression since I was a teenager. Also, there's certain personality traits that tend to be more apt to get depressive episodes, such as folks who are the type A personalities that are always on edge and angry easily, or get excited easily, and that perfectionists tend to be depressed more often. Imagine that. I'm also a perfectionist. Also, and this is a little bit scary, I think. Family, if there's a family history of depression, the children are 3 to 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression. So there is a hereditary component there. So, that's just something to think about. And here's another staggering statistic. 4 out of 10 adults, 4 out of 10, just less than half, will experience a depressive episode during their lifetime. So what are signs of depression? And I'll talk briefly about that, and then I'm going to go into my own experience living with depression. And I apologize for my dogs. They're doing their little play activities that they do every night. So, some signs, of course, you know, we think of when someone's depressed, they're just sad. Well, obviously that is a sign, but there can be other symptoms that you will not recognize as a depressive symptom, such as lack of motivation, lack of enjoyment. Just do not enjoy anything anymore. Cannot seem to get excited about anything at all. Irritability. That's another very common. I find that happens with me a lot. And the inability to concentrate and to make choices. And let me talk about, I think this will be a good place for me to start with my experiences with depression. So I think I've alluded to the fact that I have always had a poor self-body image, and that started the fact that I was an overweight preteen and teenager. And once I entered high school, I soon realized that being an overweight teenager was not a good thing at all. So I lost about 60 pounds my freshman year. And for the first time since I was a child, I was thin. And there was something about that was just incredible. People paid attention to me. Boys paid attention to me. People saw me differently just because I lost weight. Now, my body might have changed, but my body image did not change. I still saw myself as this overweight, insecure teenager. So that was nobody's fault. My parents didn't cause that. No one caused that. That's just the way I felt. So that has carried into adulthood. I never felt like that I never felt confident enough to pursue a boy. I never felt confident enough to stand up for myself as a teenager. So all those issues. And what happened once I was 16, 17 years old, I got into the dating scene. And it's a dog-eat-dog world in the dating scene. It was back then, and it still is today, just different today. But I'll never forget, my beautiful cousin came to live with my aunt and uncle. And she was just gorgeous. And she stole everybody's boyfriend. And I really didn't have a steady boyfriend at that time. But there was a guy that I was interested in, and she found out that I liked him, and what did she do? She started dating him. And now whether that was an intentional thing or not, I don't know. But that started a series, I think that's when my depression started. And I know that seems like a very insignificant thing, but for a teenager, that's huge. It is huge. And I can tell you from working with teenagers, their whole self-worth is based on what others think. So this is a huge blow when they feel they're not pretty enough, or they feel like that they're not smart enough or cool enough. They're not in with the right clique. That's a big deal for teenagers. I think it's even more so a problem now with online platforms and online bullying and that sort of thing. I think kids are faced with things that we never even thought about. So anyway, the first symptom of having depression, of course I didn't recognize it as depression at the time. I was a 16-year-old girl. What did I know about depression? But I remember crying all the time. I mean, literally. I would come home from school. I started comparing myself to every girl in the school, every single girl in the school. And I would come home and I would cry, and I would tell my mother, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to find anyone who loves me. I'm not pretty enough. And she would say things like, that's ridiculous, which probably was ridiculous. But that started my depression. And I feel like my poor body image, my lack of confidence at that time is what contributed to the beginning of my depression. However, years later, what I noticed over the years is that really did not improve. Now, I had some pretty big events happen throughout my life that anyone would have been depressed. I mean, my husband died. I was a single mom struggling to get through college, but I'm not the first person to have some of these major things happen. And some people get through this and they bounce back and they move forward and things are great. But another thing I will say is that I always felt like I had a dark cloud surrounding me. And when I talk to people, especially students, about depression, and I relay that description to them, they're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel. It is like there is a black mist around you. You can't see beyond it. You can't see the sunshine. You can't see the brightness. So what happens, and what happened back then, and it still continues to happen today, is that dark haze seems to get more intense. And that's one of the first signs. And I noticed I struggled more right after my first child was born. Now, whether that was postpartum depression or simply the fact that I had just lost my husband. So that it's hard to gauge what caused that. But that was a particularly difficult time. Being single again after losing my husband was a very difficult time because once again, I was thrown into that dating scene. This time I'm a little older. I have a child. I did not feel good about myself at all. Again, I lost weight again because I'd gained weight from the pregnancy. But it did not matter that I looked good. Looking back on pictures now, I'm like, I wish I looked like that now. But at the time, I didn't feel that way. I felt I'll never be happy again. I felt very hopeless. Another sign of depression, hopelessness. Feeling like you're never going to get out of a situation that you are in. Another sign, another thing that happens with me when depression is creeping up again is my appetite change. And some people, when they're depressed, lose weight because they don't eat. Some people, on the other hand, gain weight because food is a comfort for them. Well, unfortunately, I'm one of those people that food is my comfort. So I always gain a lot of weight when the depression is getting worse. And because I use food as therapy, basically. So it took me many years to recognize that. And while I was in my marriage of 26 years, looking back on it, when I was in the midst of it, I didn't realize it, but I got heavier and heavier and heavier. And what I've noticed is that when I look at pictures of myself, of course, I see that I'm gaining weight, but also I can see the sadness in my face. And I can look at those pictures at a particular time and just think about how sad and hopeless I felt. And why I felt hopeless, I knew I was not in a good marriage. I've shared that with you all, and that was not my husband's fault. It was just we didn't mix. But because I wanted to keep our family together, that's why I felt hopeless. I felt like I can't leave my marriage because I have to keep my family together. So I felt very hopeless. And then another thing that happened, this is something I haven't shared. People that know me know this story. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009. And I had to have a double mastectomy. And a year or so before that, I had had a complete hysterectomy as well. So here's a woman in her late 30s, early 40s that has had a hysterectomy and has now had a double mastectomy. I cannot tell you what that does to your body image. You take someone who is already dealing with bad body image, poor body image, and you take the womanness away from them, for lack of a better word. I can't describe how I felt. I felt like I was no longer a woman. I did not feel beautiful. I did not feel, I didn't feel like anything. And I remember just the diagnosis of cancer was so scary. And thank God I had a good prognosis, and I'm how many years out now, so I'm a survivor, and I'm so thankful for that. So thankful. But I tried to have implants so I would at least have some normalcy. And I have these really weird, severe allergies. And one thing that I had a severe allergy to were the implants. So couldn't have implants, had to take those out. So I have had to deal with that. So that was really, really hard. And honestly, I felt like my husband never looked at me the same after that. Now, he says he did not, and he may be right. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but I just did not feel like I was an attractive woman anymore. I didn't feel like I was a woman at all because of all that, even though I was so grateful that I was able to survive and be with my family. And it's something that I don't hear a lot of women talking about, is the change in your body image after something like that. So not only are you dealing with the diagnosis of cancer, but you're dealing with your body image changing. You're dealing with so much. So that threw me back into a severe depression. And I had to actually up my medication through all that to get me through that. So then fast forwarding into 2015, at this point, my oldest child had left home, and I've already talked about the empty nest. That was tough because honestly, my boys were the light of my life. And I was getting ready to lose my youngest one. He was getting ready to go to college, and that threw me in a depression. And at this point, I didn't know who I was, and I was so caught up in the depression that I could not think enough to even get me in a good place. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I will tell you, when you are in the throes of a major depressive episode, your problem-solving skills go right out the door. You can't think. You don't even want to think. You don't have motivation. And, I remember my doctor one time saying, well, one thing that's great for depression is exercise. That is very true, because you get a release of endorphins when you exercise, and it makes a tremendous difference. However, let me say here, if you're like me, and everybody, let me say every experience is different, but I barely had the energy to get out of the bed and go to work. Barely. There's no way that I had the energy to get up at 5 a.m. or even at night and exercise. No way. No way. I was just surviving. I was literally surviving. Even though I knew what I should be doing, I was in survival mode. So, moving in, let's move into this time, because this video could go on forever. So when this separation happened, this is where the good stress actually has the same impact on your body. This is an example of this. I moved into my own home, and for the first time, I felt like I could be me. For the first time, actually in my adult life. I felt like I'm so fortunate. I have a beautiful home. I have a roof over my head. Even though I had been through a really traumatic separation and divorce, it was a good thing that I moved and I was able to create my space. It's a very serene house. The colors I intentionally picked to make them calm, and it's my haven. It truly is my haven. However, leaving my home where I raised my children was the most difficult thing I've had to do in a very long time. That was hard. Just being, even though my husband and I were not good for each other, being away from him, I've been with him for 32 years. That was a change. That was horribly hard. Traditions had changed. Everything had changed. Just the whole year of change was so hard and really sent me into a spiral, a downhill spiral. It was very, very difficult. But I will say that it took me, that was in March of 22. Here we are 2 years later. And for the most part, I'm actually doing much better overall. But I still have days where it's hard. I'll admit it's really hard. I feel like sometimes the hopelessness kicks in because it is so scary. I'm sure there's people out there that can relate to this. It's terrifying to be 59 years old and to be single. Terrifying. It is so hard because I found out not too long ago that my employment will be changing come September. I have worked at the same place for 21 years. That terrifies me. On one hand, I'm excited about new opportunities. On the other hand, I'm terrified. Seeing my parent, my mother, my surviving parent, her health deteriorate. Not knowing what's happening, not knowing what's going to happen with her in the near future. That's terrifying. My own health. You know, I have physical health problems as well. And just, you know, thinking, what am I going to do if something happens that, you know, I can't take care of myself, which I pray to the Lord above that that's many years down the road. And, you know, I'm trying to take good care of myself. I don't always do that. But all those concerns sometimes are so overwhelming and I get really, really depressed. On top of that, the loneliness, even though it is a welcome feeling because I can literally be myself in my home. I can do what I want. I can be with my dogs, who are the greatest comfort ever. But the loneliness sometimes is so overwhelming. When I have friends that say, well, you need to get on dating apps or you need to, get out more and all this. I've tried dating apps. I didn't enjoy it. I mean, it's so foreign to me. Who would have ever thought at 59 I'd be dating in the first place? Now, does that mean I don't want to find someone? Absolutely not. I would love to bring someone into my life, but that's scary. That's also scary. And then you take a person who has always struggled with body image, who struggled with depression. You put them in a 59-year-old body and we all know what happens to your body when you hit 60. Things start changing a lot. And just the thought of being close to someone is terrifying. So, that's depressing. So, and you worry about your kids, even though they're grown and they have their own lives and they're doing wonderful, you worry about your children. I remember this 80-year-old lady at our church said, honey, you will worry about your children till the day you die, no matter how old they are. And I believe that. I totally believe that. So that's a long answer to say that on most days I am doing good, but I have my moments, and last night was a moment that I feel like I can't go on. Now, is that to say I would harm myself? Absolutely not. I'm just saying that sometimes it's so hard. And you know, when I talk about this, because I openly talk about depression with people, because I feel like that's one of the problems in our society is people don't talk about it. Oh, you can't talk about that. And people will say, but Sherry, you seem so happy. Yeah, I'm not going to show that side of me. I have a happy persona that I usually, my public self, I have a public self and a private self. They're two different people. And that's why it's so hard for me to make this video, but it's also another reason why I feel like it is so important for me to make this video. I'm going to jump over to treatments and things you can do if you are suffering with depression, some things that that help. And then I'm going to end this video by talking about advice I would give. Now, there are non-medications. Exercise, as I mentioned before, is a wonderful way to release those endorphins and get your mood elevated. Eating a healthy diet, which I'm not the best at, is also another way. You have to get your body in a good physical condition, and that involves sleep. You need to have good sleep, which another thing depression will affect, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you need to have a healthy diet, you need to have healthy sleep patterns, you need to exercise, and you also need to have a support system, whether that is a friend, a family member, whatever your support system. It's extremely important that you have a support system. So those are the non-medication things I would recommend. An exercise can be something as simple as walking or dancing. Dancing is something I really enjoy doing, and I do it in the privacy of my home. Am I going to go out and dance in front of people? No, absolutely not. But those are some things that you can do to kind of keep your depression in check. Now, some things that, first of all, I would highly recommend if you suspect that you're dealing with depression. I highly recommend that you seek the advice of a therapist. Now, you can go to a licensed clinical therapist, you can go to a psychologist, you can go to a psychiatrist. And a psychiatrist can actually just prescribe medications for you. These will be antidepressants and mood elevators and maybe some anti-anxieties and things like that, which work beautifully for some people, and sometimes it takes a while to find the right medication. Sometimes it's a combination of medications. So, and in very extreme cases of depression, there's other medical interventions that can take place. But those are things that you would have to obviously discuss with a doctor. But the first piece of advice I would give you is, you may have a friend, a family member, or someone that you can talk to, but I recommend that you find yourself a good therapist because they're trained to know what to do. They're trained to look for warning signs. They are not going to tell you what to do. They are going to help you figure out the best plan of action for you. Something else I wanted to mention is depression can definitely affect your sleep. You can either sleep more or you can not sleep at all. This is actually how I gauge how I'm doing. When my depression is not well, when I'm not doing so well, I will literally sleep around the clock. I could sleep forever because here's what happens with me. I just get to a point I don't want to think. I don't want to experience life, so I just sleep. And that's how I know, oh, I need to see my doctor because things are getting worse. So that's kind of my gauge on how well I'm doing. And also and one thing I've noticed about myself since living alone, I'm tending to isolate myself much more. I have opportunity to go out with friends and family and all that, but I'm finding more and more that I don't want to do that. It's just very comfortable here. And that's a sign of depression. Isolation is a sign of depression. Now, not everybody that wants to be isolated is depressed. That's not what I'm saying at all. But a person who typically loves to be with people, who typically is an extrovert, and they're finding themselves wanting to be more isolated because it's just too much energy to be with people and that sort of thing, could be a warning sign that you're going into a depressive episode. So I would encourage you to seek the help of a professional if that's happening. So I know we were kind of all over the place with this, but I really felt like this is something that I needed to talk with you guys about. Depression is not something at all that you should be ashamed of. It is a condition just like anything else, any physical condition that we're treated for. There are ways that it can be controlled and you can have a happy and productive life. You just have to stay on top of it. It doesn't just magically go away, and it's not something that you can just get over. So I hope this video has been helpful, and I hope that it's helped at least one person. And please know you're not alone. Please know that you're not broken, that there's nothing wrong that can't be fixed. And please know that you are special and that you do matter. I hope all of you have a wonderful week, and I hope, here Daisy, come up here. I hope that you enjoy your upcoming weekend. We'll be seeing you soon. Goodbye. Say bye, Murphy.